My husband thought I was just his beautiful, quiet wife. He never suspected my silence was a sharpened blade, waiting for the perfect moment to cut through his lies. My husband, Mark, always said I had a graceful quietness about me. He meant it as a compliment, of course. In his world of sharp suits, aggressive litigation, and courtroom theatrics, my calm demeanor was a refuge. He saw me as his peaceful harbor, the serene, smiling wife who kept the home perfect and the dinner warm. He loved showing me off at firm dinners, his beautiful, quiet wife who didn't interrupt the important men when they spoke. He had no idea that my silence wasn't serene. It was observant. It all started with the Gable House. It was a magnificent old Victorian, a local landmark with a wraparound porch and a turret that looked like something out of a fairy tale. It belonged to an 80-year-old widow, Eleanor Gable. Mark had been handling her estate after her husband passed, a pro bono case he'd taken to give back to the community, he'd said with a pious smile that never quite reached his eyes. Soon, giving back turned into convincing the sweet, slightly confused old woman that her big house was a burden. A lonely old place for a lonely old woman, he'd murmur over the phone, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I started noticing things, little things at first. Mark was usually meticulous about his work, locking his briefcase the moment he came home. But with the Gable deal, he grew careless, arrogant. He'd leave files open on his desk, convinced I wouldn't understand the complex legalese anyway. He'd take calls on speakerphone in his home office, laughing with his partner about how Mrs. Gable kept forgetting the terms they'd discussed just the day before. "Her mind is slipping, poor dear," he'd say to me at dinner, shaking his head sadly. "It's a mercy we're helping her liquidate this asset before she's taken advantage of." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I saw the two different appraisals he'd commissioned. One, from a reputable firm, valued the property and its considerable land at just over $2 million. The other, from a new, unheard-of company, put it at a paltry $700,000. Guess which one he presented to Mrs. Gable? I saw the draft of the sale agreement, full of convoluted clauses and predatory terms, all designed to transfer the property to a holding company I'd never heard of. One night, while he was asleep, snoring softly beside me, smelling of expensive scotch and self-satisfaction, I slipped into his office. A few clicks on his laptop using the password I'd seen him type 100 times our anniversary. How sentimental, and I found the truth. The holding company was registered to his junior partner's newly married sister. A shell designed to buy the house for a song, hold it for a few months, and then sell it for its true value, with the profits split between Mark and his partner. What Mark forgot, or perhaps never bothered to learn in the 6 years we'd been married, was who I was before I became Mrs. Mark Furlong. Before I was the silent, graceful wife, I was a forensic accountant. I spent 8 years of my life digging through the labyrinthine finances of corporate crooks, finding the single misplaced comma or the hidden offshore account that would bring their whole empire crashing down. I was good at it. I was a bloodhound for numbers that didn't add up. And Mark's numbers weren't just off. They were screaming a confession. The final signing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at Mrs. Gable's house. "I want you to come, sweetheart," Mark said, straightening his tie in the hall mirror. "Just as a witness. It'll make Eleanor feel more comfortable to have another woman there." He wanted me there as a prop, a symbol of domestic tranquility to soothe an old woman while he robbed her blind. I just smiled my serene, quiet smile. "Of course, darling. I wouldn't miss it." We walked into the dusty, sun-drenched living room of the Gable house. It smelled of old books and lemon polish. Mrs. Gable was sitting in a floral armchair, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Mark was a whirlwind of practiced charm, patting her hand, fetching her a glass of water, his voice a low, reassuring hum. He spread the thick stack of papers on the antique coffee table in front of her. "Now, Eleanor, we've been over this. This just makes it all official. Your worries will be over." He slid the pen across the polished mahogany table towards her frail, trembling hand. He glanced at me, a triumphant, dismissive smirk playing on his lips. I was the silent witness, the pretty decoration for his grand victory. He saw a wife. He had no idea he was looking at his executioner. My hand tightened on the single manila folder hidden in my oversized purse, the one containing every piece of evidence I'd painstakingly gathered. As Mrs. Gable's pen point hovered just a millimeter above the signature line, I took a quiet, steadying breath. The silence was about to be broken. "Don't sign that, Mrs. Gable." The words, spoken in my usual quiet tone, landed in the silent room like a dropped piece of crystal, shattering the fragile peace. Mrs. Gable's hand froze, the pen still poised over the paper. Mark's head snapped towards me. The charming smile was gone, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Honey, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice low and tight. "This is a private matter. Let's not confuse Eleanor." I met his gaze, my own expression unreadable. I'd practiced it in the mirror for weeks. "I don't think I'm the one who's confused," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. I reached into my purse and placed my manila folder on the coffee table with a soft, definitive thud. It sat there between his predatory contract and Mrs. Gable's teacup. Mark stared at it as if it were a snake. "What is that?" he demanded. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm providing clarity," I said, opening the folder. "Mrs. Gable, my husband presented you with an appraisal for your home, valuing it at $700,000. Is that correct?" The old woman nodded, her eyes wide and darting between us. I slid a document across the table to her. "This is a copy of that appraisal from a company called Swift Valuations." I then pulled out a second document. "And this is another appraisal Mark commissioned a month prior, from Sterling and Finch, the most respected firm in the state. They valued your property, including the undeveloped land behind it, at just over $2 million. The color drained from Mark's face. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "Sarah, this is privileged client information. You have no right—" I cut him off, my voice still level, but with an edge of steel he'd never heard before. "You left it on your desk, Mark, right next to the catering bill for your victory dinner with your partner. You got careless." I turned my attention back to Mrs. Gable, whose hand was now resting on the $2 million appraisal. Her knuckles were white. "Mark's plan was to buy your home through a shell company for less than half its value. Then he and his partner would sell it for its true price and pocket the difference. A profit of over $1 million, stolen from you." "That's a lie. She's hysterical," Mark spluttered, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Eleanor, my wife. She doesn't understand these complex financial matters. She's overwrought." But Mrs. Gable wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of sharp intelligence in her supposedly cloudy eyes. The fog was lifting. "A shell company?" she whispered. "Oak Ridge Holdings, LLC," I supplied, pulling out another sheet. "Registered 3 weeks ago to a Jessica Crane. I believe you know her, Mark. Your partner's newlywed sister-in-law? The one who needed a quick infusion of cash for her new boutique?" Every word was a nail in his coffin. I had the incorporation papers, the bank transfers from an offshore account he controlled, the emails between him and his partner outlining the entire scam. It was all there, in black and white. He was trapped. The charming, powerful lawyer was gone, replaced by a cornered animal, his eyes dark with fury and panic, locked onto me. He saw the folder, the source of his ruin, lying open on the table. He took a step towards it, his hands clenched into fists. "You have no idea what you've just done," he snarled, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You just destroyed our life. For her." He lunged, not for me, but for the evidence, his intention to rip it to shreds clear on his contorted face. But before his fingers could touch the paper, a new voice entered the room. It was Mrs. Gable's, but it was completely transformed. Gone was the frail, wavering uncertainty. In its place was a voice that was clear, cold, and ringing with authority. "Get your hands off that table, Mr. Furlong." Mark froze, his hand hovering over my files. We both stared at her. She sat perfectly still in her armchair, her back ramrod straight. "It's all right, Sarah, dear," she said, giving me a small conspiratorial smile. "I've heard everything I need to." She then reached up and gently tapped the antique silver brooch pinned to her cardigan. "And so has my son. He's been on the phone with me for the last 10 minutes. He found your little scheme quite fascinating." A tiny hidden speaker in the brooch crackled faintly. "He's an assistant district attorney." Mark's face went from pale to a ghastly shade of gray. The revelation that not only was his scheme exposed, but that he had confessed his fraudulent intentions to a prosecutor hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, collapsing into his chair, the picture of a man whose entire world had just been demolished before his eyes. All the arrogance, the smug superiority drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow, defeated shell. "Eleanor, I can explain," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. "I think you'll have plenty of time to explain," Mrs. Gable said, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "To my son and to the State Bar Association." She looked at me, her eyes clear and sharp, and I finally understood. The forgetful, confused old woman had been an act, a brilliant, patient performance designed to lull the sharks into a false sense of security. She had been playing Mark the entire time, waiting for him to overplay his hand. She wasn't a victim, she was a hunter, and she'd just sprung her trap. My evidence was simply the bait she needed. The next few hours were a blur of quiet, efficient destruction for Mark. Mrs. Gable's son, a tall, no-nonsense man named David, arrived with 2 uniformed police officers. There was no shouting, no dramatic scene. Mark was read his rights in the same sun-drenched living room where he had planned to commit grand larceny. He didn't protest. He just sat there, staring at me with a look of utter disbelief and raw hatred. As they led him out, his last words to me were a choked whisper. "Why, Sarah, we had everything." I just looked back at him, my serene mask finally gone, replaced by the cool, dispassionate gaze of the accountant who had just balanced the books. "No, Mark," I said calmly, "you had everything. I was just another one of your assets." The fallout was swift and brutal. Mark's law firm fired him and issued a public apology. His partner, in a desperate attempt to save himself, turned state's evidence, providing even more details about their predatory practices. Mark was disbarred. Faced with an ironclad case, he took a plea deal, trading a long prison sentence for several years, plus full financial restitution and crippling fines. The house, our beautiful life, everything he built on lies, was sold to pay back his victims. I filed for divorce the next day. In the proceedings, I didn't ask for a thing. I didn't want a single penny that was tainted by his corruption. I walked away with my maiden name and the contents of my own bank account from before our marriage. I packed a few suitcases, left the ghost of my old life behind, and moved into a small apartment downtown. A few weeks later, I got a call from Eleanor Gable. She insisted I come over for tea. When I arrived, the house felt different, lighter, happier. She had hired a legal team on her son's recommendation to go after Mark's firm for their negligence and complicity. They're launching a class action lawsuit, she told me over Earl Grey and scones, for all the other lonely old clients Mark and his friends helped. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. They want someone to help them comb through the firm's records, find all the discrepancies, a forensic accountant to be precise. David mentioned you might be looking for work. She slid a business card across the table. It was for the lead attorney on the case. I looked at the card, then back at Eleanor, this incredible woman who everyone had underestimated. They saw a frail widow. I saw a queen defending her castle. I suppose they saw me in a similar way, a quiet wife, a pretty accessory. Mark never understood that my silence wasn't weakness. It was a vantage point. It allowed me to watch, to listen, and to learn. He thought he was the master of his universe, but he was just a man who couldn't see the person sitting right beside him. As I picked up the card, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't Mrs. Mark Furlong anymore. I was Sarah Connolly, and my work was just beginning.